Okay, now if I go to the users page, here we have the table of the users. And in this table we have this column and of roles and this column of permissions. So you see, and each row is for each user, right? But what I want to do now, I want to show those roles and permissions for each user, because if I go to this index of this file, here, as you can see, we have these two columns which I'm showing this simple text, roles and permission, but I need to bring the real roles and permission for each user, right? So what I want to do now, I want to show those. So to be able to show this for each user, what I have to do, I have to assign first the roles and permission for each of the users. So to be able to do that, if you remember, if we go to the create here, we have this section here which we have added here, but it's just text, right? So this is the role where we have to see the list of the roles, and depending on the roles we are selecting here, we are showing the permissions under for each role. So this is what I want to do now, create all these sections. So this section for the roles and permission, when I'm submitting this form, to be able to submit with the roles and the permission assigned to this user, and that I'm gonna create, but not just in create. As well, I want to do this in edit, because we have to be able to edit and add it here after the password, right? So this is what we're gonna do next. Okay, so let's do this. If you remember, in the models of the roles and permissions, if we go to the role, you see we have a relation here. So this is a relation with the permission. So through this I'm gonna show the permissions that are related to this role, and as well we have done it for the permissions. And if we go to the permission model, you can see we have here as well this role method, which is bringing the role related to the permission we are using, and we are using this table, role permissions, remember that, which is where we're saving the relations between the roles and permissions. Okay, so this is clear, we have this created already, but we would like to do something similar for users, right? Then if I go to the user model, I should create here the relation with the permissions and the roles, right? But I'm not gonna do it here, but instead I'm gonna create a trait. For those who don't know what the trait is like a class from where we can inherit from various places in our applications. So if you need more documentation about this, for those who don't know what it's a trait, well, this is how we learn. So here in the documentation, you see, you can translate it in the language you need. So here is explaining what is a trait, but just in just a few words, this is like a class that we can use and reuse, in our code. So let's create this trait. In Laravel, we can create traits inside of app. So let's create here a folder which we're gonna call it trait. So let's right click, new folder, and let's traits. Now I have this folder. Inside of here I'm gonna create a file. I'm gonna call it as roles and permissions .php, right? So here what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna create a trait, and from here, inside of this trait, we're gonna add our relations, and later on we're gonna see how this will be used. So let me just add some a code here, and I'm gonna explain it. So let me just type to the tag PHP. In here is my code. So this is the namespace. This is specifying the root where this file is. So it is apps and trade. This is the namespace. Then we are using the use and inserting the role model, because we're gonna need to insert the relation with models, and then we are using the permission model, which we gonna need to use as well for the relation with the permissions. Then here is the trade, right? And this is similar to a class, and then we can import it in our model, user model. So you can see we have already trade which is imported here, is used here, which comes by default in Laravel. So if I go to the documentation here, in this section, we can see how this is used. So this is how we create it, and then this is how we use it. So then let me just go back to my trade, and I have created the relation with the roles. For example, here is with the roles. This is simple relation belongs to many to many, which is many to many, and then we're using this table, users roles, and we have as well the permissions, which is similar, but for permissions. So I'm creating the relation, then I'm using the belongs to many, and then this relation is inside of the user permissions table, right? So let me just save this, and what do I need to do now? It's insert it here. So if I put here a comma, and then I'm calling, but before I call it here, I need to insert it here. So use, and then it's in app traits, and then the name, which has roles and permissions. So this is very important to insert this on top here, and then I'm going to call it here as roles and permissions. So now we have everything ready to be able to use these relations. So now we can use this inside of our user model, and inside of our controllers through this model, which is the user model. So now if I go to the project here, we said that if we go to users, inside of create, what I have to do here, bring the roles, bring the list of all the roles that I have in the database, and I can select in this form. So to be able to do this, I need to use the create method. So if I go to the controller, let me just go to users controller, I need to use this method to be able to send inside of this inside of this method create. I need to send the roles to the view. So let me just create a variable first. Let me call it roles, for example, and then I'm gonna call the role model, and then call the method, use the method get, or I can use all as well to bring all the roles. So let me just, well, before I use it, I need to import it as well. You see, this is we have a line under this word, meaning that it's not imported. So let's import it, use up, and let's call the role model, right? And now I can use it. You see, there is no underline. So let me just do a dd dump and die, and use this variable to see what this brings. So if I save this, if I refresh the page, now I have an array of objects, and we have all the roles inside of this. Yeah. So let me just send this now. Let's send it to the view. I'm just creating an array. I'm gonna create the key, which I'm gonna call it roles, and then assign this the value of this key will be this variable, right? So now I have this to the view, so I can use this to the view, inside of the view. So let me just go to the view here. Inside of the folder users, I have the create, right? And here you see we have these dots, which this is the place where I have to show the roles, and then I'm gonna show the permissions. Depending on the role I'm gonna select, I will show different permissions, right? We're gonna see this in a moment. So now here, let me just type a for each, and then I have to use this variable, which I send it through the create method, which is this one here, and the name is this one. And whatever name you put on here, you need to use it in the view. So here I'm gonna type roles and then role, and inside of the for each, let me just do a dump, and then using this variable to show, let me show, for example, the name. Let me just see what is bringing. If I save this and refresh the page now, you see I have all the roles I have in the database now. Yeah, admin 1, admin 2, admin 4. So now we have the roles, but what do I have to do? I need to use different like a list here, selection list, right? So let me just create a select. Let me just name it the value of the name role, ID role, and here let me just put a class as well, which I'm gonna put role as well, and then inside of this select I'm gonna put this for each, but this has to be option, right? And then the value of this has to be, let me just copy name and paste it inside between those two tags, and then the value should be the ID, right? Let me save this. If I refresh the page, you see I have all the roles here. If I inspect this now, we can see that here we have the ID in the value. Yeah, so the value of the value attribute, we have the ID, and then we have the name of the role. So now we have the roles. I just need to fix this view. So here, if I add this class form control, so this is a bootstrap class. See, if I save now and refresh this, you see this is looking nice now. So now we have the roles. Now, depending on the role I'm selecting, I need to bring the permissions for each role. If I select admin 1, I need to bring the admin 1 permissions. If I select admin 2, I need to bring the permission for the admin 2 role. So now, if I go to the code editor here, let me just paste the code which I have already prepared before, and I'm going to explain this. So this code here is just, we have a label, then we have a div which has an ID, permission checkbox list, and what this will do through a jQuery script, we're gonna bring the permissions. So we're gonna fill this div with the permissions depending on the role I'm selecting on the options, on the select option here. So if I scroll down, let me just paste the code. So I'm gonna create first, this is a section which I'm identifying the JavaScript for this file. So this is called a JS user page, right? I'm gonna go to dashboard here. You see here, if we scroll down, we have these sections, this yield, which this is calling the sections for the assets, in this case for the JavaScript, for the jQuery, for specific pages, right? So this section, it's called for this create page, right? Anyway, with this we have seen this before and we know what this is doing. So I'm just adding a script here, and then I'm using this document ready function, which is from jQuery. When the document is ready, so we are running the code. It's inside of this function. So let me just create first, for example, let's create some variables identifying this box. Yeah, so this is what I have to do, identify these divs, right? So let me just paste that code, this code, so which is this one here, which I'm creating some variables. First one, I'm identifying the So through this ID, I am identifying the box, this for the permission box, which is called like this in the ID. And then the other one, which is permission checklist, which is this one, this one here, same through through the ID. And then I'm taking the first variable, which is the full box, which is a full box, and I'm hiding this box through this function hide. Okay, so now let me just paste this code. So what I'm doing here through this role ID, so this is the ID, use it in the select. So this says on change every time I'm selecting a role through the selection. So the element select, which is this one here. So this is the select element. Here is the ID, the role ID. And then I have so on change, it says on change every time I'm changing this option, which is selecting a different role. Every time I'm selecting different role, so I want to execute what is inside this function. So what I have to do is identify I need to identify each of the roles every time I'm selecting them. So I need somehow set up the ID and the slug, and then then I will send this to the controller. So how can I do this? I need to use the custom attributes data. The data custom attributes. So I'm going to paste this code and I'll explain. So this is just a custom attributes which I'm creating here. One is for the ID, which is called role ID, and then we have role slug. And then I'm passing the values to identify each of the roles. So because I need to send this somehow, I need to send this to the controller, and through this data I'm identifying the permissions for the role I want to I will select. So this role, anytime I'm changing roles here, will change the permissions under this selection list of roles. So I need to identify somehow what type of role I'm selecting here. So what I have to do, I have to take this role ID, which is inside of this attribute, and role slug, and save them in the variables, in some variables. So I'm going to paste this code and I will explain what this does. So the first variable, which is this one, this line, I'm just creating the role variable, and then I'm saying this inside of this, which is inside of the section that has the ID role, find the option selected, which will be the role I'm selecting, right? Which is through this select, right? So this is how I'm identifying what role is selected, and I'm saving this in the variable role, and then I have the role ID and the role slug by using the data function. So this is how I'm selecting through the role ID and role slug. So are this one here, right? So we have those two to one. So now I have the values set it up in these variables, and now I can use them. Okay, so let me just test this a little bit just to make sure we understand this. So let's do a console log, and this will show me in the console what this will bring. So for example, let me show the role underscore slug. So if I save this is as an example, just an example to see what is this. So if I refresh the page here and I do inspect, and if I go to console here, which is this one here. Yeah, so if I click on that, let me see what is this. Well, this is something from chart. Well, I will fix this later on, but there's nothing to do with what we are doing right now. So if you look on here, we'll see what this will bring every time we're selecting different roles. So let me select admin. You see, is bringing me the slug. If I do admin 2, and admin 4, you see, this is what is bringing in through this variable. Let's try with ID. Let me just refresh this and do again. Admin 1 is the ID 1, admin 2 is the ID 4. Yeah, admin 4 is the ID, it's 11. So you see, this is how I'm setting these variables. Okay, so let me just delete this. And this was just for example, as an example to be able to understand. So let me just paste an Ajax code, and I'm gonna explain line by line. Yeah, let me just arrange this a little bit. Yeah, so what is Ajax? This Ajax is doing. For those who don't know what Ajax is, what is a request to the servers without loading the page. Yeah, so what I'm doing here. I'm just so here is the call to the server, which we are setting up some parameters. You see, like URL, method, type of data, and the data we are sending to the server, which in our case will be the controller, and then we have the response. And inside of this response, we're receiving the data from the controller, from the server, and then we're using this data to populate the div where we're going to show the permissions. And here in the request, we have here is the URL where we're going to do the request. This is the type of the request, and this is the type of data we are sending and receiving, and this is the data we are sending, right? And then when I'm receiving the response, yeah, I have inside of this data, I have the data I can send from the controller, and I'm using this console log to see what I'm receiving. Then I using the function to show that that box. Yeah, and here what we have, we are using the function each. Yeah, so this function, what this does is taking every value, every value inside of the data, and executing this function for each of the data. And what this does, I'm looking this permission checkbox list, checkbox list, which, if you remember, is this ID on here, yeah, which is this div. I'm setting this div in this variable here, yeah, and then so selecting this div and then appending with this code, and then append function is adding this code, this div inside of that inside of this div. So I think this is not that difficult to understand. So let's test this and see, and I think will make more sense once we gonna test. So before we test it, I just want to do something else. So anytime this line is happening, so on change, anytime I'm changing or selecting a role here from this selection list, under this selection list, depending on the role I'm selecting, we're gonna see the permission for that role I'm selecting, yeah, but I need to delete, so empty the div for the old permissions and add the new one. So let me add this line, and this permission checklist box, we're using the function empty. This will empty that div, so later on you're gonna see that. So first of all, let's take care of the request, which is this one here. So I'm calling this root, which this root will call, we're gonna call the user's controller, and create method, right? So if I go to the controller now, inside of the users controller, I have the method create. And what I need to do, I need to check if the request is an Ajax request. So I just can do a condition here, if, and I can add a parameter here this way, request : Ajax, and this will check that the request is Ajax. I can use it like this, or if not, as well I can use this variable request. Yeah, so using like this. So you can use it either ways. Well, I will leave it like this, and this is what it's doing is checking that the request is an Ajax request. Is this true? I'm going to execute what is inside of this if. So in this case, I'm calling from this file, and we are sure this is a Ajax request. Yeah, but probably we can call from other places as well. So if this is true, I'm going to execute what is inside of this if. So I'm going to create a variable here. I'm going to call it roles, and then I'm going to call the model role, and then I'm going to use the method where, which is a condition, and check that the ID is the request. And here inside of the request, I have this data which I'm sending here. See, role ID and role slug. Well, this you see, these are these variables, role ID and role slug, which I'm setting here. Right? I'm creating here these variables, and the value of these variables are the values that comes in the custom attributes through the data function. If you remember, are this one here, just to make sure we are in the same page, so we understand what we are doing here. So these are the values we are setting on those variables. Okay. So here I can use this through the request. So I can use role ID here. So if you want to check this, I can, for example, copy this. Let me just comment this line, and let's do, for example, return, and let's do request role ID. Yeah, which this is coming through the request variable, and then I gonna send it to the response here in this parameter data. So I can show you, I can view this through the console log. Yeah, so let's save this, and let's see what is this returning. If I refresh this page, I'll get an error. So I miss curly brackets. If I save again and refresh, well, I got this error. This is an error which I have to fix because this is coming the chart. So let me just, I got another error. Let me see if I return. So let me try something else here. For example, text. Let me just refresh that. Let me select the role. It's not showing anything. Let me just do something here. So let me fix this chart. So this one, I have to take off this from this page, from the dashboard, because I don't need it in any page. So I just need to put it in the index page. So inside of here, I just have to paste that here. And let me just refresh again. I still got something else, so let me check. Okay, so I got this one as well. So let me just take this, and this is something from the index. Well, the dashboard. In the dashboard, I got the dashboard here. I got some charts, which are here. This comes with the template, so it has to be. But I don't need to call them in each of the page. in every page. I just need to call it indicator. So let me just paste this here. So now I shouldn't have that error in the users page create. If I click on the create in spec now, if I go to console, see, I don't have that error, because this was storming us. Okay, so let's continue now. If I select a role, I should see the text, because it's doing through this, it's doing a Ajax request. So if I go to this method, I should see this text, but it's not. If this is an Ajax, I will return. Let me just return a number, for example. So this is the response, and let me just comment that and just show. I just do this console log, just to make sure there is nothing interfering with our code. So if this should be able to see what I'm returning here. Let me go to the browser and refresh again. Control F5 to clear the cache. We can try with this. Sometimes it's good to clear the cache. You see, we can see the number, but I think this is not a problem, because see, we can see numbers. But if I click, if I type a text, so if I try with the text, this is not showing the text. You see, if I select a different role, it's not showing that text. Well, I need to comment this, so because it's the type of the data I'm working with. So let me just comment that line and let's test it without this line, because this has to be JSON data. So let me just select another role. You see, now we can see the text as well that we're sending from the controller. Here, let me just change this and see. If I refresh and select another role, anytime I'm selecting a role, this Ajax request is happening, and is returning what I'm returning here. So now it's working. Let's delete this, and what I want to do, we have sent this role ID and role slug. Well, we don't need the slug, but I just use it just in case. So through this, I got a role, right? I identify the role, I select on the select option through this ID, because I'm sending the ID through this ID. I know what role we are requesting, and then we need to use the method first, and this will bring the first role that we found through this ID. So then I'm going to create another variable, which I'm going to call permissions. And inside of this variable, what I'm going to do, I'm going to use this roles variable, and then the relation, which is the relation, the permissions relation. So this is this variable, and through this variable we can call the relation with the permission. So now here, let's return that. So I can do return, and let's use this variable, which is the variable that contains the permission for the role I'm selecting, right? Okay, so now if I go to the view, well, here I'm just uncomment this, and what I'm doing now using the data, which is this one here, and this is the data I'm sending from the controller. This is an object. Well, it's a JSON format, the data that will contain all the permissions for the role I'm selecting, right? Which is this one here. So from here, inside of this variable, I have all the permissions. So what I will do now, let me just uncomment this, And what I'm doing, showing that box, the box with the permissions, through the show function. Then I'm using this each function. This means for each permission. So the first parameter is this data, then I have this function, which this function, inside of these functions, I'm doing for each element inside of the data, for each permission, I'm gonna show a checkbox, right, which will be the permissions for that role I'm selecting. So you see, I have the index and the element parameters, and through the element parameter, through this parameter, I can bring the data, right? Which, for example, I can bring the you see the element, then I'm using the slug, which will bring me the slug for the permission, right? For each of the permissions. You see, I have the slug, then I have the name and the ID. You see, I'm using this slug ID, and I'm inserting this through the inside of the HTML, and this will be a checkbox that will show the permission. So this is a div, and then append will insert each of the permissions. We will see this, and this will make sense for you in a moment, right? So this is what we do here in this portion of code. We just going through each of the element that is inside of this data, as I'm executing this function, which what this function is appending like this HTML code with the values for each of the permission, each of the permissions for the role that we are selecting. Okay, so now if everything is correct, and if I save this, if I go to the view here, if I refresh the page, if I select the admin, well, admin 1, this is sending me an array of objects, but this role doesn't have any permission. So let me just select one which I know it has permission. For example, this admin 4, you see, this admin 4 has 2 permissions. So you see, every time I'm selecting a role, through this role, I see his permissions. If I, for example, select a different role, for example, this one, this doesn't have any permission. Later on, we're gonna see, we're gonna add more permission for each of the role. You see, this is what I was talking about earlier. So through this, I'm emptying the div, and once we change the role, we empty that box with the permissions and add the new ones. Well, let's do something here now. Let me just go to admin 1 and let me assign more permissions. Yeah, so let me just close this. So if I select admin 1, you see we don't have any permission. So this role doesn't have any permission. So what do I want to do? Add more permission for the admin 1. So let me edit this one, and let me just see. So if I just submit now, as you can see here, we have more permissions. We have permission for this role. So if I go to users, if I go to create, and now if I select admin 1, you see I have all these permissions that are available to be able to select this. Here I can select, I can assign for this user, I can assign this role, and then I'm assigning these permissions that I want for this role using this checkbox.